Hello everybody and welcome to week 2 of our MOOC, English as a Medium of Instruction for Academics. I'm Mary again and this is Rob. Say hello, Rob.
Hello.
It's lovely to be back with you again, and what we're going to do is just comment on a couple of issues that have come up out of the topics that we've been studying together over this past week. So over to you, Rob. I think you want to start on the topic of EME and EMI, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that was the question we put forward last time. So mentioning that for quite a number of years now, we've preferred the term EME, English Medium Education. There are a couple of names for the field that we're talking about, but EMI for a long time has been the more common term, which we've moved away from. And yeah, one of the reasons for that is really a moving away from this almost classroom-centered, teacher-centered, this kind of focus on the individual who's teaching the classes. So the instruction is where teaching happens. And I think there are two things, actually. A big shift in the field, where I think when we do these kinds of open training sessions, we ask for people's views, responses, best practice. We see lots of the solutions and lots of good practice comes outside of the classroom. But I think this is also reflected in the second point, which is a shift in education. I think higher education in particular now sees itself going far beyond the classroom. You know, people talk about breaking down the walls of the classroom, where there is a role for the teaching that takes place within a room with a group of students, but there's much more beyond that. How do students support each other? How do you create dialogue between students? How do you communicate with students beyond the classroom? We often talk about what happens before, what happens during, and what happens after in the cycle of EME education. And I think the challenges that come with teaching through English in a linguistically diverse and a culturally diverse environment, you need to meet those challenges in the whole educational experience. And that's why we feel medium of education offers a much broader idea of what we're talking about. Where we engage with students, where we engage with language, and this idea that the instructor and the instruction is the location of the language and the location of learning and knowledge is quite an old-fashioned idea, and it doesn't really appreciate what we can do as educators and how many tools we have now to help students to help themselves to learn, to grow, to develop, and to become more confident in the content areas, which is what we're talking about. So how they can develop transferable skills and content knowledge in the whole educational environment, not just the teacher teaching students in the classroom. So I think that would be my interpretation of why very quickly we moved away from instruction as a key word that we're looking at. And I will now invite Mary to add your wiser and more concise perspective, as always.
I couldn't do that at all, Rob. What you've said, I totally agree with. I just find the word instruction really quite harsh, and it does conjure for me the picture of the instructor delivering the knowledge, whereas education is so holistic and embracing of everyone, everyone having something to contribute and to give to other people in the learning environment. So it's just education is it on a sort of emotional level is warmer, inclusive, and it just fits the way I and you, I think, try and lead our classes, whether they're online or face-to-face in the classroom. So for me, I'm just so much more comfortable with the word education and EME. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
And
that's how we feel anyway. And if you don't agree with us, I mean, please, let us know. Put your comments in the comments either this week or next week, week 3. And we'd be delighted to know how you feel about it. Maybe you feel that EMI is a better word, and I'd love to hear from you if that is the case. Maybe we're missing something. but together, Rob and I do have this interpretation of EMI and EME, and are happier with EME.
Absolutely, and thank you very much. I'll now ask you the question, Mary.
Right. What are you going to ask me?
Ask me the first question. Yes. What else did you notice from this week? What was particularly interesting?
Lots of things. I particularly would like to focus today on just a couple of issues around the voice and speaking and pronunciation and so on. Because obviously our voice is our main tool, and it's something that we do have to take care of. In the lecture theatre, the classroom, wherever we are, we're aware of, some of you have said about how quickly are we speaking? Am I speaking too slowly? Am I speaking too quickly? What happens if I speak slowly? What happens if I speak quickly? And all we can say really is, trying to find the right speed for you and your students, and you may have to adapt and try out different ways of speaking just so that you feel comfortable with your students. But there are so many different things going on. You're worried perhaps about your speed and your pitch, your intonation. Are you sounding interesting in front of your students? But the students have also got perhaps slides to look at, or perhaps they've got a worksheet with them or a book, and they're making notes. And as well as that, there's all of your body language, how you're moving around. There is so much going on at one time, and it's really hard to think of all of these things at the same time and get it right, because we're always trying to get it right, aren't we? So all we can say is, practice, but do look after your voice. And one of the things that can prevent you from speaking and using your voice, this tool, in the way that you really want to, is tension, stress, worry, anxiety. So I do advise people to actually physically, it's a physical thing, is, do shoulder exercises, upper body movement that will relax their head, their shoulders, and so on, before they go into class. Because first of all, it does wake you up a little bit. It gets the blood flowing around your head. But if you can relax those muscles so that you don't get tense, then I think you've got a better chance of using your vocal apparatus and so on in the best possible way to make your meaning get across to your students. So that's just something that it's nothing really to do with EME or EMI, whatever we call it. It's just good teaching. And a feature of EME is basically good teaching, whichever context we're in. So in order to get that confidence with your voice and your speaking, to help you with your pronunciation, if you're perhaps lacking in confidence with your pronunciation, do try and just relax a little bit before you go into class. All right. There were lots of things that I was interested in, the comments that you made. Somebody mentioned that they couldn't quite get their head round, they couldn't understand can and can't. Well, I have the same problem. I mean, in sort of British influenced English, the vowel is quite different. It's usually a can and can't, which for me I can hear. But somebody who's got a more, let's say, American influenced pronunciation, I can't really do American accents, but it comes out as sort of can, can't, and I can't hear the T, all right? And I always have problems with this. So if you can't understand something, it's maybe not your fault. I mean, it's nobody's fault. It's just a difference, that's all. So if you have difficulty understanding someone, you have to use other devices like interruption and so on. So I think that's the other message that I'm trying to get across here. When you're listening, or if someone's listening to you and they don't understand you, it is nobody's fault as such. It's just you're different, that's all. Yes, oh, and the other point was context. When you're having difficulty understanding, or somebody's having difficulty understanding you. In a recent conversation with someone, I heard the word palaces. And I was thinking, palaces, the Queen, Buckingham Palace? No, and it wasn't. It was actually policies. But because we were online, there wasn't the clarity of pronunciation that I might have heard if it had been face to face. But what helped me through it was the context. Of course, she wasn't talking about the Queen and Buckingham Palace. Of course, in the context, it was policies. So the message here is, okay, perhaps the pronunciation is not quite what you expect, but the context helps you. And when you're in front of your students, if you're, I don't know, teaching business English or something, you're more likely to be saying policies than palaces. So your students will understand anyway. So there is the total message from all of this is really, there is so much going on, but all the little aspects of delivering our lecture or teaching in the classroom, it doesn't matter so much if perhaps there's something that's not quite as good as you would wish it to be, because other aspects going on kind of compensate. I realise I'm talking an awful lot, Rob. Am I making any sense?
You are indeed, Mary. I was just
well, carry on.
Just going to add as well, what you didn't mention as well is that, you know, the awareness of what you can't understand helps you, because like for can and can't, if you're going to be lecturing about what people can or can't do, that's where you might need visual aids, or you might need to use a lot of body language. You can't do that. Yeah, like the tick and yeah, but you know, you look at you know, how we're going to look at slides next week, but
we are, yes.
When you look at the visuals of a lecture, you know, a lecture is multimodal. We choose to make some things visual, and I think one thing with EME, where you've got different people from different language backgrounds, could even be British and American, because that has potential for misunderstanding. That's where visuals can be helpful, or body language, or slowing down, or not using abbreviations. You know, like cannot is not ambiguous, you know. So yeah, you can adapt that to the audience, you know, and it's good to reflect on what you have trouble with, because your students will.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right then, is there anything else you'd like to add, Rob, before we bid these lovely people goodbye for another 7 days?
I was just going to add a word, kind of complexity. One word, 2 words. Complexity and the human. I think I'll add those 2, because we've been looking at example lectures, and I think one thing that's really interesting is what we can learn about what we began talking about, you know, education. So as an educator, I think lots of people pick videos that are really performers, you know, they're for a wide audience who would become interested in this topic within this one lecture. There's no follow-up, there's no lead in, There's no shared relationship there. And what you're watching is an entertaining performance. But I think so there's a lot to learn from that kind of TED Talk video style. But I think there are other things like we've been talking about, like when do you need clarity? When do you need more dialogue? How can you prepare students to come into your lecture? How can you create relationships? And lots of the comments about speakers also are about their qualities as a person, about how interesting the content is, about the structure, about the language. There's a lot that goes on in education, and I think that's something we're really glad that you can capture, but it's important to reflect on that. There is a lot that happens, and some people in EME get very anxious about their English level, maybe their grammar, because they failed a lot of grammar tests in the past. But you realize there's a lot more going on than someone's grammar or someone's pronunciation. And you can deliver really interesting lectures and form really positive relationships and allow learning to take place when you're from a range of backgrounds with very different language styles. So I think that's another important thing to think about, like what kind of person are you to your learners and who are they to you? I think that's more powerful in some ways than focusing on the specific elements of language or structure only.
Only, yes.
Yeah, but thank you. That we can finish now, as we don't want to keep people too long.
Okay, right. So this is us saying goodbye and see you next week. Post your questions in step, let me have a look at the number, 3.17. Okay, 3.17. Any questions you'd like to ask, anything you'd like us to comment on next week. So have a lovely week, everybody, and see you next week.
See you next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.